Okay, in 4.4 and 4.5, once again, I'm doing these together because 4.4 is just an overview of respiration and 4.5 is in more depth. Once again, might point out, like, okay, this is way too much detail, you only need to know this part. Um, so that is just something to keep in mind. So cellular respiration takes place and it's going to be the job of making ATP by breaking down sugars. So most of the time when you guys think of respiration, you think of I'm breathing in oxygen, I'm breathing out carbon dioxide. Well, yes, that is what happens in respiration, but when we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to look at what do we use that oxygen for when we breathe it in, and how do we get rid of the waste products that we breathe out, or where are those coming from? So that's going to be what we are looking at in this section. So cellular respiration is an aerobic process, which means it requires oxygen. So aerobic stages take place in the mitochondria. So mitochondria, if you remember from the last chapter, we call it the powerhouse of the cell. That's going to be where the energy is taking place at. So that is a picture of a mitochondria there. That's going to be where any of the aerobic processes take place. Glycolysis needs to happen first before respiration can occur. Glycolysis is anaerobic, so that means without oxygen. It does not require oxygen for it to work. So to begin respiration, we do something that does not need oxygen to happen. If when you do it, there's not enough oxygen, it will do what's called fermentation, which we'll talk about in the next section. If there is enough oxygen present, it will go on to respiration then. So it's going to take place, glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. It's going to split the glucose molecule into two 3-carbon molecules. So the word glycolysis actually means sugar breaking. So it's going to produce 2 ATP molecules. So it takes 2 ATP to start. It really, in reality, is going to make 4, but there's only a net gain of 2 ATP in this stage of respiration. So that is going to be what we get from this stage is these 2 3-carbon molecules, which are called pyruvic acid, and 2 ATP, and you'll also get some electron carriers we'll talk about in the next section. So cellular respiration is a mirror image of photosynthesis. When we look at it, the Krebs cycle transfers energy to an electron transport chain, which it's going to happen in the mitochondrial matrix. It's going to break down the 3-carbon molecule, that pyruvic acid, that was made in glycolysis. And it's going to make a small amount of ATP, but it's going to make a lot of electron carriers. During that process, during the Krebs cycle, another name for the Krebs cycle is the citric acid cycle. During that process, it's going to make all of the carbon dioxide we breathe out. We will also be transferring energy carrying molecules to the next stage of respiration. So that's what you see over here to the right is you're going to end up having the pyruvic acid is coming in there on the left. It's going to go through, it's going to do a cycle, it's going to release carbon dioxide and energy, and then the energy that's created from there is going to go down, and it's going to need the oxygen that we breathe in here, and actually some of this oxygen should be up there as well, because we're going to need oxygen to help remove the carbons to get them out of the way. So it's going to come in and make the carbon dioxide, and it's also going to make the water down there below. The electron transport chain produces a large amount of ATP. So it takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. The energy transferred to the electron transport chain. Oxygen is going to enter in this process as well, and ATP is going to be produced, and water vapor or water is going to be released as a waste product. So when you exhale all of the water vapor you breathe, all of the condensation that you breathe out is from this process, the electron transport chain in our cells. So that's what this picture is showing once again. So like I'd said before, the equation for respiration is the exact opposite of what it was for photosynthesis. So you have glucose, which is the C6H12O6, plus oxygen is going to give you 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and then we could also put plus and then energy. I'm not going to write all of it. So it's going to end up being energy. So the reactants of photosynthesis are the same as the products of cellular respiration. So, and that's what this picture down here is showing you. So it takes in light energy, takes in carbon dioxide, takes in water, gives sugar, gives oxygen. Respiration is going to take in sugar and oxygen. It's going to give you energy. It's going to give off water. It's going to give off carbon dioxide. So now looking at it in more detail. So glycolysis is needed to start cellular respiration. The products of glycolysis enter cellular respiration when oxygen is available. 2 ATP molecules are used to split glucose, like I said before, and 4 ATP molecules are going to be produced. That gives us a net gain of 2 ATP that are going to be created in that first stage. During this time, it's also going to produce, when you pull apart the molecules and things like that, it's going to release hydrogen ions, and those hydrogen ions or electrons are going to get picked up by the electron carrier NAD+. And so it's going to end up becoming NADH whenever it picks up any of those high energy electrons. So it's also going to create 2 molecules of pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So right here in the picture below, it's showing you what happens. 2 ATP are used, 4 ATP are created. You end up creating 2 NADHs during the process and 2 pyruvic acids. So pyruvic acid, 2 ATP, 2 NADH are what is created in that first stage. So those are the products in that first stage. In the Krebs cycle, the pyruvic acid or the pyruvate is broken down before the Krebs cycle. It's going to release carbon dioxide. So in order to release carbon dioxide, we need oxygen to come in and help pull those carbons away. Otherwise, they would just reattach to those hydrogen ions when you break apart the carbons from each other. And so you're going to create a lot of NADH during the process of the Krebs cycle. At the very beginning, you're going to have this coenzyme A is going to bond to the 2-carbon molecule. So this is before it even enters in during this process. It's going to create an NADH. It's going to break it apart. Oxygen is going to come in and take away that carbon so it doesn't reattach. The Krebs cycle produces energy-carrying molecules. So that's the main job of it. So as it goes through, every time you rip off a carbon, you're going to end up having, you'll sometimes create ATP during the process. You'll create 1 ATP per time around. You've got an NADH created there, and NADH created down at the bottom, and FADH2 is going to be created, and it's going to keep just going around that cycle. So the Krebs cycle, like I said, produces these high energy electron carriers, the NADH, the FADH2 are going to be made. You're going to have intermediate molecules with coenzyme A enter the cycle. You have, when I had said earlier that it's also known as the citric acid cycle, because when it makes the 6-carbon molecule, that's citric acid at that point in time. So citric acid is broken down, carbon dioxide is released, and NADH is made. You need to do it 2 times around to process 1 molecule of glucose because you broke it into 2 molecules. So during that process, you're going to make 2 ATP usually, and several carbon dioxide are going to be created during that process. So the 5-carbon molecule is going to continue to get broken down. You're going to have NADPH or NADH and ATP are going to be made, and it's going to rearrange all of that stuff. So all of the electron carriers that we've mentioned already so far, they're going to go to this next stage. So just to refresh, in the Krebs cycle, it ended up making carbon dioxide, ATP, 2 of them, and it made several electron carriers. The electron carriers, they're all going to go from this stage, and from glycolysis are going to go to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is going to use the NADH and FADH2 that were created to make ATP. So these high energy electrons enter the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain, you can think of it as like a stairway. So it's going to be stairs going down, and the electrons are going to be going downhill. And on each jump down, it's going to release energy. You're going to use that energy to attach a phosphate to an ADP. So the energy is used to produce or to transport these hydrogen ions across that inner membrane. These hydrogen ions are going to flow through a channel in the membrane, that ATP synthase that we had talked about before with the photosynthesis. It's going to be the same process. Phosphate's going to come in. The ATP synthase, you can think of it as like a turbine on a dam. So as the hydrogens go through, it's going to spin, create energy. That energy is going to be used to attach a phosphate to the ADP. In this whole process, the electron transport chain, again, is going to use those to make the ATP. The breakdown of 1 glucose molecule produces up to 38 molecules of ATP. So ATP synthase produces ATP, and oxygen is going to pick up electrons and the hydrogen ions. So if we didn't have oxygen there to pick up those hydrogen and electrons would reattach to the electron carriers, but they wouldn't have high energy, and so you wouldn't be able to continue to make energy. So the oxygen is important to come there, grab those, take them away, and we breathe out water as a waste product at that point in time. So that is the end of the notes for sections 4 and 5.